Our typical cold January weather has finally showed up, so we're all trying to hibernate either in the house or out in one of the shops as much as possible. And if you read the title of this video, you probably think that hell may have frozen over, because I'm headed to Bob's today to work on an LS engine. Now, Bob's been wanting to work on LS's and get the dyno set up for fuel injection for a couple of years, so he recently purchased a Fuel Tech ECU and everything else that he needs to get the dyno up and running for EFI. But of course that means we need an LS fuel-injected dyno mule. So when one of Bob's customers brought a Chevy pickup in with a bad cam and lifters, they elected to just put a junkyard engine in the truck and keep on going. And instead of turning this engine in as a core, Bob replaced the cam and lifters with this camshaft from BTR. After completing a valve job on the heads, the engine was then bolted on the dyno and became the official junkyard dog dyno mule. So here we go, Uncle Bob. We're firing this thing up this morning. We're going to make a couple pulls on it. And are we still working on the tune on the EFI?
Oh, slightly.
Okay.
We're getting close.
Okay.
To being perfect.
It's already made 417 on pump gas.
Right.
And I brought an intake manifold with me today. If we can get to it, we're going to toss a carburetor on this thing. Now the carburetor obviously is right out of the box. It's brand new. We haven't tuned it, but we're just going to put that intake and carburetor on and see how far we get with that today.
When it made 417, it was a total different day. Temperature wise, I mean, now we're in winter, so we haven't changed really anything from the 417, so we'll see what it does.
Okay. Within the last couple of months, Bob hired a young man to come up and help him at the machine shop, and the two of them, together with help from Fuel Tech, have got this dyno all set up for fuel injection. This little 5.3's already made 417 horsepower, but under different weather conditions. So one thing we were just talking about is the exhaust gas temperatures on EFI. They're all very, very close. Like that's probably a little tighter than what we would normally see on a carburetor, and that is because it's sequential port fuel injection, and the fuel injectors are aimed right in each intake runner, whereas the carburetor just sits in the middle, and each intake runner kind of gets what it gets. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's not so good, right?
And that's the advantage of fuel injection.
Oh, Uncle Bob.
It is what it is.
It is what it is. Since the weather patterns have changed since the last time we dynoed this 5.3, we want to warm the engine up and make a baseline pull first before we make any changes. Since Ohio is experiencing an area of low pressure, the barometer is down, and thus so is the horsepower. So what did it make there? 403?
403.
Now, it sounded like it laid over just a little bit on the top end there or something. What are you showing on your graph there, Ryan?
The correction, in the middle of the pool, the correction is like less than 1% for the O2.
Okay.
So that's good. When it loads it real hard down here, it corrects, but once he lets it go, it's real close. Left bank is a little leaner than the right bank.
Interesting. Now, one of the things about EFI is you've got all this data laid out where you can see what's going on and troubleshoot. So what do you think caused that fluctuation?
I'm not sure.
You're not sure?
I don't have any ideas.
Well, now listen here. We've got electronic fuel injection, the best thing known to man, and everything's right there on the computer. And you're telling me you don't know?
Nope. I ain't no professional.
We scoured through the laptop and couldn't find anything in the timing or fuel tables that would have caused those fluctuations in RPM. All right, so we put 3 degrees of ignition timing in this thing. We're going to fire it back up, warm it up, get it back up to temperature, and make another pull. Bob's always very careful to make sure that the water temperature and oil temperatures are exactly where they need to be before we start to make a pull. It's very important for consistent data. I think maybe one of the problems we're fighting is one O2 sensor doesn't read quite like the other. So with 3 more degrees in it, it sounded better at idle, like it had a little bit better throttle response, But as soon as you started to load it, you could definitely tell there was a problem.
Didn't like it as well.
Yeah, and it lost, what, a horsepower or something, like 1 or 2?
About the same.
We've found the limit on ignition timing. And according to Ryan, the air-fuel ratios look good all the way through the suite.
Yeah, these are, you got to remember this graph is between 12.5 to 13.0.
Yeah.
And it's fitting in between that graph.
Yeah, they're tight. So I think we're probably ready. We can go ahead and swap that intake and throw a carburetor on and see if we can't screw this thing up.
Okay.
Now, for the record, this is just a stock GM truck intake that originally came on this engine with 706 cathedral port heads. We'll be replacing it with a Holley dual plane intake and a 950 CFM ATM carburetor. So by no means am I trying to say that this is the right way to do this, but it just so happens the only carburetor I have is this 950 for a gas carburetor. I do have a 750 E85 carburetor here also, but we're on pump gas for right now, and that's how I want to keep it. So if I had to guess, I'd say this carburetor is probably going to be a little bit lean on a 5.3. I could be wrong, but if I had to guess before we get into this, I'd say it's probably going to have a little bit of jet added to it because the little 5.3 is such a small engine and that's such a big carburetor. I don't think it'll move quite as much air through the venturi to put signal on the booster to pull fuel out of the main jet like maybe it should. You know, if it was a 400-inch engine or something like that, it'd be different. So we'll see what happens. Now, it's tough to make a comparison between EFI and a carburetor on an engine that never came with a carburetor to begin with. So I decided to try this dual plane Holley and brought this spacer just in case we have any fuel distribution issues. A common problem on engines like LS's and small block Fords that don't have Siamese intake runners. We ready to check for fuel leaks, Uncle Bob?
Already checked.
Oh, already checked. Wow, you guys are flying in here. Now keep in mind, this is a brand new carburetor right out of the box that's never been put on an engine before, and it fired right up and idled as if it had already been run. However, it didn't take long for us to find our first problem with putting a carburetor on an LS. I see this happen all the time, and the carburetor's the first to be blamed. So I've seen this a lot on EFI to carburetor swaps or just people putting carburetors on. They hit the throttle for the first time and they cough back through the carburetor and they instantly blame the carburetor. Yeah. But it's not the carburetor. It definitely didn't have enough ignition timing in it. No. I could hear that, but what did you find?
It had -5 degrees of timing.
Oh,
and
God.
it had idle.
Yeah.
Because that was the minimum limit.
Okay.
That's what it was.
So since the fuel tech doesn't pick up a signal from the fuel injection side of it, it just automatically pulls all the timing out to its minimum, which was -5, right? Yeah. So now we've got the timing set at 30 degrees at idle, 30 degrees max.
Minimum limits.
Yeah. So now we should be good to go?
Yep.
All right, let's see what it does now. Initially, we thought we had the problem fixed. All right, so we fired it up, we warmed it up, we're starting to cool it back down, we're getting ready to make a pull. All I can tell you is this is definitely not what I would spec for a carburetor for this engine. Like that was spec for a 427-inch small block Chevy that made almost 600 horsepower. This is basically a dead stock 5.3 with a cam and a dual plane intake. Definitely not optimum for this combination, but we're gonna see what it does. We good to go? All right, here we go. Don't have enough timing in it. I had a strong feeling this is exactly what would happen, but I wanted to catch it on video and explain to everybody what happens when you try to run a carbureted engine on an EFI timing table. So I preach this a lot to guys on the internet that are fussing with carburetors on an LS motor. If they go through and they check the internet and they say, well, our engine made best timing at 30 degrees on EFI, that ain't the same thing as a carburetor. The carburetor, the fuel droplet size on the carbureted application is going to be a lot bigger. So the fuel droplets are going to burn slower, which means you need more ignition timing. And this is pretty typical. And generally when this happens, people call up the carburetor company and blame the carburetor, when in reality it just doesn't have enough timing in it. So we're not trying to show perfection here today and not show any problems. What I am trying to do is show what you can expect if you take an LS motor and you throw a carburetor on. In this case, the carburetor is probably way too big, but this is typically what's going to happen with EFI ignition timing on a carbureted application. Feel all right? Sounds all right. Something's not happy.
After compensation, and everything's at 0, so that shouldn't be affecting anything.
For some reason, the fuel tech system was still trying to pull timing once Bob started to load the engine with the dyno. So Ryan set the minimum and maximum ignition timing to 36 to effectively lock the timing out. Well.
13 more horsepower?
Well. And it ain't even right.
No,
Poor old Bob.
I don't do nothing.
Like, it made 417 on EFI the other day, but today it made what, 403?
Graph from the other day when it made 417, and today, today it made 417. The other day when it made whatever 416.
Yeah.
So the green of today, see how much more horsepower and torque it made down low
With the carburetor?
with the carburetor from 3 to 4, and it wanted.
Yeah, that could be due to the aftermarket intake. Like, we're judging a dual plane aluminum poly intake to a stock truck intake, which,
Yes,
you know,
huge difference.
that's a huge difference.
But it made a lot more down here on low.
And I figured that it probably would, but I was concerned it might suffer up top with the dual plane.
So when it missed, it was, the fact is I was half throttle or a little more.
Oh.
You know, and when I went on full thing, is I don't know whether it was a little too much fuel for it there.
It was
hanging
probably
low.
too lean,
And,
if I had to guess.
and then so
Can you see what the exhaust gas temperatures did when you, or is it not logging at that? Okay, let's check. What we're concerned about here was when you went to throw the handle at it, you're throwing the throttle at it, it kind of bogged, and we're not sure if that was lean or rich, but what are you showing?
I'm showing that it's rich. Now, typically what I have been setting the dyno at is 3,500 as far as on starting the pull, and on this LS application, we brought it down to 3,000 because of the fuel injection. We could pull it a lot lower. It was
Right.
keeping it clean.
Right.
Well, this is an example of is as I'm trying to open up the 4 barrels, the squirters are putting in an extra amount of fuel here,
Oh,
so
I see.
it's going rich, and it's hard for the engine to kind of recover
I got
a little bit
Because
for it
it's
to come-
already under load a little
it's
bit.
yeah, it's under load. The brake is holding it, and the computer is holding it. So we're getting a little extra too much fuel down here low,
Okay.
and so then it's kind of cleaning itself as it comes up the graph.
Right, that's an accelerator pump
And it's
issue.
an accelerator pump on this big carburetor.
So this carburetor was originally built for a 427 small block Chevy with a big cylinder head, a big single plane intake, and a massive hydraulic roller cam, which requires a lot of fuel from the accelerator pumps, which is why this carburetor is equipped with 50cc pumps front and rear. However, this little 5.3 with a dual plane intake doesn't need and can't handle this much accelerator pump shot. I'm really happy that we got to take video of this whole situation today with it popping through the carburetor.
That's learning.
Yeah, it's just part of learning. And honestly, that is probably one of the number one things that ATM deals with when someone puts a carburetor on anything. It's, oh, it pops back through the carburetor, it's too big, it's too much, and this, that, and the other. In reality, it's just the ignition timing a lot of times. Not all the time, but a lot of times. And so we literally took a 950 carburetor, not at all intended for this combination whatsoever, bolted it on, and made a little bit more power. But the main thing I'm surprised is that 950 was clean. Like, we can still tune this thing.
Absolutely.
I was shocked because I really thought it would be a little bit lean, and in reality it was a little bit on the rich side, and we could take some fuel away from it and make some more power. I don't know, it'd be interesting. Yeah. Let's talk to Fuel Tech about this ignition thing and see if we can't get an answer from them, because they've been really good.
Really good. And we get a simple explanation what you got to change in this scenario.
Yeah, because you've just got the timing locked out, like minimum and maximum.
Yeah, I set limits on it, just 36 minimum, 36 maximum.
Right.
Because I don't know, I'm just not experienced enough to know.
Yeah. None of us here are experienced enough to know anything.
Yeah. I don't know, you watch it.
All right, guys, welcome back. It's Sunday, and I'm headed back up to Bob's. Last night, as you saw in the video, we made those pulls on the carburetor, but you know, it did pick up 13 horsepower with the carburetor and the dual plane intake. However, there's quite a bit of meat left on the bone, I think. The air fuel showed it was a little rich at wide open throttle, at max RPM, at max power. So I brought my jet kit with me today, and I'm gonna take a little fuel out of it. It wasn't happy down low, and Bob seems to think maybe it was just because of the accelerator pump. So I want to make a couple changes there. I might disable the rear accelerator pump because it really doesn't need it for the dyno. And if that's the case, then that should clean that up. And I don't know, we'll see. I still think there's something going on in the Fuel Tech system where it's trying to pull timing down low for some reason. Either that or Bob's right. It just, the accelerator pumps on that 950 are a little too big. You know, they're 50 cc accelerator pumps and 35 squirters. So it's a considerable amount of fuel to be dumped down that thing when you kick it wide open. Like I said, it was spec'd and built for a 427 cubic inch small block Chevy, not a 5.3 LS motor. So you know, obviously it's not optimum, but really I was pretty excited yesterday to see that it made that much power without any tuning and without even being close to right. So we'll see what today brings. All right, so we're back for day 2. Have you found anything in that computer that might lead you to believe that there's still something going on with the timing?
Timing, no, but I think we might try putting a spacer on it, because the rev limiter is at $7,000 and it just falls completely flat at 6,800. Right?
Well, that's what I was concerned about with that dual plane intake. I'm actually surprised that it made that power at that RPM, to be quite honest.
Yeah.
But we can try that spacer, but I do want to try taking a little bit of fuel out of it. And Bob was concerned that maybe the rear accelerator pump, when he was putting the throttle to it yesterday down low, he was concerned that maybe that would be a problem where it was too rich. So I think what I'd like to do is one step at a time. I just want to take a little bit of jet out of the carburetor because wide open throttle air fuel ratio showed rich. So let's correct that first and then we'll go from there. How's that? So Bob goes ahead and fires the engine up for the first time today, and we notice something immediately. The air fuel ratios and the exhaust gas temperatures cylinder to cylinder are way off at idle, a clear indicator of fuel distribution issues with this intake. All right, so we warmed the engine up, and I had Bob run it out of fuel for me so I could pull the bowls off. I just took 4 thousandths orifice out of the rear jets, and the rear jets only. I just want to take a little bit out of the back because it seemed to be a little bit rich on the rear. It could be the accelerator pump, but we'll see. So we took 4 thousandths out of the rear jet. We're getting ready to fire it up and make another pull. I can't believe how crisp that carburetor is out of the box.
Sounds wonderful.
So as it turns out, there was a little meat on the bone, wasn't there, Uncle Bob?
There was just a little bit there.
Let's check our air fuels and see what a difference that made. I took 0.004 out of the rear jet. Let's see what it did. So as you could hear in that video, it struggles when Bob puts the throttle to it with the dyno loading it down low. So I went ahead and disabled the rear accelerator pump to take that pump shot away from it. Bob feels like it's too rich. So I took that accelerator pump cam out of the back to disable the rear accelerator pump just for the dyno session, just to see what this thing does. All right, so we made 427 horsepower on that last pull, but like I mentioned yesterday, I was concerned that intake would probably nose over about 6,600 RPM, and that's what we're seeing. Now, this camshaft should pull to about 7,000. That's what they're saying, but we can't seem to get there. So we're going to throw that HVH spacer on this intake manifold and increase the plenum a little bit, let it breathe a little easier, and we'll just see what it does. I don't know. We're just learning today. That's all we're doing. I've never really tuned on an LS engine, but I've had plenty of experience with dual plane intakes on small block Chevys, and typically 6,500 is pushing it. Like that's about all the RPM range you're going to get. So Bob and Ryan go ahead and lift the carburetor off, remove the carburetor studs, and put the 2-inch HVH spacer on and bolt the carburetor back down.
That surprised me. Yeah, it's helping it.
Yeah, it's helping it for sure.
A lot.
See, that dual plane intake, I was concerned that it would do exactly what it was doing.
That's really interesting.
So when you put that spacer on, I don't know if it's going to help the horsepower, but it definitely helps balance out the exhaust gas temperatures.
Absolutely.
So yeah, I mean, I figured it might do that, but it'll be interesting to see what it does if it helps it for horsepower. Lost a little bit. Interesting.
But it picked up on the pull, the performance of the pull.
You think so?
Yeah.
It sounds good.
I would leave it on there.
So that's interesting because when you put it wide open, it took throttle better.
Yeah, that's what I said. It did better.
Yeah, it took throttle better, but overall horsepower looked like it was down. So
what, 3 horse?
Yeah, about 3 horsepower. Interesting. So it actually picked up a couple hundred RPM at the top end with that spacer.
Yeah, it's pretty close.
It's pretty close. It didn't do a whole lot, but
no, it didn't change it a lot.
But it seems like it took throttle better.
Yeah, it took throttle better.
And it definitely cleaned up the exhaust gas temperature cylinder to cylinder and side to side. So Ryan, what do you think as far as the air fuels? What do you see here?
The spacer definitely leaned it out, but it didn't really change much from bank to bank.
Okay. So bank to bank's pretty much stayed the same, but it definitely leaned the air fuel out just a little?
Definitely leaned it out.
Okay. So how high was the air fuel?
About 13.0 on the right bank and like 12.2 on the left.
Okay, so that last pull, although most of the pull was really, really good, overall power was down 3 horsepower. And Ryan and Bob both confirmed that the air fuel ratios showed that spacer leaned it out just a little bit. And it's probably about as much as I took away from it with the jet change. So I put the jets back in the back of the carburetor, and we're going to make another pull with the spacer. And this is right back to out of the box jetting now, but one more pull with the spacer to see if there's a little bit more power to be had with this little LS. So what's it look like, Ryan?
Move this basically right back to where we were with the stock jetting without the spacer.
What do you think, Uncle Bob?
That's the best overall from start to finish.
Is it?
Max low end, max high end.
It's cleaner when he goes wide open.
I noticed that. It's taken throttle a lot better. So we've made 427 horsepower with a stock 5.3 with a cam, a dual plane intake, which I'm not necessarily really fond of at this point. I think it would run better with a single plane, but it's made 427 horsepower, 380 foot-pounds of torque on pump gas. I do have an E85 carburetor here, Uncle Bob.
Let's do it.